can finally play the solo, everybody! We can play the solo! Hi everybody, I'm Luke Hector from The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, please remember you can thumb up the video, consider subscribing to the channel, but most of all, please leave a comment about your thoughts on this game that I'm talking about, or the channel in question. And if you want to help me get some more review copies to show you case and do more videos on, then the Patreon campaign is always running and every little bit helps. And we'll get on to the review in just a second, but first, a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
Now when it comes to expansions, thinking about what's coming out this year, Garphill Games have kind of like dominated my anticipation for them because we've already got a couple of expansions coming out for Viscounts of the West Kingdom, a game I really love and I can't wait for that. But this is the second and I would like to hope probably final expansion for Architects of the West Kingdom, which I got on Kickstarter. This isn't a review copy, I kickstarted it under normal efforts and I grabbed the big box and the playmat with it, and I want to talk briefly about each of those as well as the expansion. The expansion is Works of Wonder. We already had the Age of Artisans one, I think that was what it was called. I have done a full review of this on the Beyond the Blades game series, so by all means please go back and check out that video if you want to find out more on that. I thought it was a brilliant expansion, adds, balances a couple of aspects out, it doesn't add any real major complexity. I teach it with the base game all the time and it's just like really solid. So the only thing I was slightly afraid of with Works of Wonder is this going to take the complexity to a point where I can't teach it with the base game? That was always a slight worry. There's not a huge amount of extra complexity from it, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. But mainly this game came with a new solo mode, and that I think a lot of us were anticipating, because the solo mode in the original Architects is fine. It works, but it's definitely kind of, you can tell it's like the first attempt at a solo mode that they were really doing. The solo mode in Viscounts of the West Kingdom is far better. It had the AI boards, you could pick an AI board which kind of dictated the personality of the thing you were up against, and this one has essentially put a solo mode in to borrow heavily from that and evolve it. Question is, does it all work? First up though, let's get on to the other little side bits I want to mention. Very quickly, the playmat. Now, I am a big lover of playmats, as you know, and I can't get this whole playmat out of the tube to show you. You can just look at the photos that I've got. But essentially, yeah, they are a bit of a luxury item. I mean, this is not cheap as well. I think it was like a 25-30 quid purchase or so. You are paying money for these playmats. However, and as much as I never say a playmat is essential, I actually almost want to call this one essential for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it looks great. It's got that lovely artwork all over the place and it's well organized. But what this does do is that it solves a big problem that you have with having two of the expansions. If you do not have the playmat, if you put both expansions together, you need the main board, you need a side rectangular board, you need this overlay tile which was a little bit on the flimsy side with the inlets and stuff to put on the guild hall, and you needed a single card that you put on the black market to show that that's a new space. That's a very fiddly and messy looking way of putting the expansions in. With the playmat, the expansions are all on the playmat. You even have storage, you even have card spaces to put the artisan cards, which you didn't have before. That was never on the main board, and everything is all stitched together in one big board. I love this playmat. If I'm playing Architects, I will always bring this playmat out, hands down, without question. This is kind of on par with the Raiders of the North Sea playmat. Honestly, these playmats I consider to, again, not necessarily be essential, but highly desirable. If you want to get any add-on for this, I would say get this before you even consider getting metal coins, frankly. It's that good. Love it. Great playmat.
You're not sleeping with it, are you, Ray?
Now, the big box, I can't be quite as positive about this one.
That's putting it mildly, 007.
I mean, positive first, you do get a big box. Finally, I can now store everything for architects in one box. I don't need to have those stupid little square boxes, which I'm so glad that Garphill Games are now deciding to not do anymore with the South Tigris series. Seriously, those square boxes were irritating. But I was able to get artisans in that box with the help of a folded space insert. Still, I always like support folded space. I think they are the best insert makers around, hands down. But, problem. There's no folded space insert for this big box, and all you got was a black tray, effectively, like a black tray in this box, which, yes, it stores everything in it, and that's about the only thing it's good for, because what it does is that it completely destroys any quick setup you had with an insert previously. Now, if you never had an insert in this game, the insert's actually half decent, but any insert that you had or any method you had for speedy setup is completely destroyed by the insert in this box, because you essentially have to have all the player pieces in these tiny little cubby holes for them, which is hard to get your fingers in order to get them all out. But if you imagine that every time you set up the game, you've got to, let's say 5 or 6 players, everybody's got to get in here and claw those pieces out and all the resources and everything, because nothing detaches from the insert. I'm used to having little bits. I can go, there's your player pieces, there's those resources, there's this set of cards. But you can't take this whole insert out of the box and put it somewhere for a convenient setup. You're going to have to get everything out, and then you're probably putting it into pots and that, like I do with like my little muffin cases that you see in my photos. The insert in this is a complete fail, frankly. But what I have done, as you will see from like this little lifting off the lid and some photos that I'm going to put up. Basically, I've cannibalized my folded space insert. I mean, honestly, I could chuck away some of these extra boards because I want to use the Playmat, but I found a way to get like the folded space insert stuff in here in a decent organized method that I can semi-remember from memory. All the player boards and everything can fit in this box, and there's no box lift when I do it correctly. Now, obviously I have to remember how it works. I might even have to print off a photo so that I can remember. But yeah, it all fits. No box lift, perfect. So there is a workaround. But yeah, it really depends on what you had before. If you want everything in one big cool box with cool artwork on it, then by all means do. But this is not one I would call essential. I think you're just going to have to decide for yourself. Are you willing to take out that insert and find your own storage method? Or are you going to just stick with having multiple small boxes? It's entirely up to you.
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
So after all that's been said, what about the expansion itself? Well, Works of Wonder doesn't add a huge amount to it, but most of it revolves around this little sideboard that you have now on the side, which is basically an influence track. So you were tracking virtue with the purple banners, now you got blue banners for influence points. And if you get to the highest point on here at the end of the game, you get some gold as victory points, and you can spend influence to negate virtue costs, money costs, or even potentially gold and marble costs. You know, influence is basically like another resource that you can chop and change. It might even get you some green cards. But that's just one aspect of the influence. The main part, which I think is the best part of it, is you now have a Princess and a Profiteer character that runs around the board. There's a particular card that goes on the top of this, on the bottom of this board here, and you've got one up here for the contribution, shall we say, and consequences, and they dictate where these two characters are. So Princess could be at the silversmith and the Profiteer could be at the King's Storehouse, and they just stand there for the moment. But what happens is when you go to their spots, the Princess will allow you to make a contribution to a Works of Wonder, and so you can pay a resource and it will get you influence points, possibly even a bigger reward depending on what you contribute. The Profiteer will get you more influence. They've also got little quirks about when you capture like people near them. So if you capture people on the Princess's location, you'll actually lose virtue, but you'll gain virtue if you capture people on his location. Think of this as the slightly good one and the slightly evil one. But this gives you a nice little interesting choice to make about where these two characters are, and are you willing to go to those locations with both those characters there? Because also when the black market resets, which now can happen more often because when this contribution chart fills up, the black market resets, you have a consequence for having been at each location. Most people at the Princess location gets a cool benefit. Anybody with stuff at the Profiteer's location has to then send them to prison, and I think the one with the most, or certainly one of the most, ends up with a negative consequence. So there's a good and bad. You've just got to sort of tailor what you want to do with these two characters, but they add a nice little choice, not complex at all, and it's just a cool little addition to the game, because once they're done, they then move around the board to different locations, and so it introduces a new cool little tactical element. What on earth are these works of wonders though? Well, you've got 5 of these chunky wooden pieces, which I do like wooden buildings, they're all quite cool, but they represent the works of wonder for each of the resources, so clay, stone, wood, gold and marble. And what you can do is you can basically build them like a building card, but they're expensive. They cost a lot of tax, they cost a lot of influence, and they cost about like 10 plus of a single resource. It's kind of insane. But the contributions that you give to the princess when the black market resets go onto the cards for these works of wonder. I can't find the cards at the moment, but basically it's just a card with the building on it. But it essentially discounts the cost for the contributions that people have made. So you might wait till a bit later in the game, but then how long do you wait? Is anybody else gunning for it as well? Or do you build it early? Because besides being a lot of points, they count as you having an extra worker at that location, or you can gain more influence. This is probably my weakest link of the expansion. I mean, it's a good addition. I don't think, spoiler alert, I don't think anything in this expansion is bad. But I really love the Princess and Profiteer mechanic. I think that's really cool, and I like having this influence track as a new means of spending for currency or an endgame point scoring thing. But the Works of Wonder cards are a little bit hit and miss, because if you build them late in the game, it's basically just so you can get the victory points. And you can easily tell when somebody's gunning for one of them, because you need something like 10 to 15 of a resource half the time. So you need like 12 stone perhaps. Well, it's kind of obvious when somebody's getting a bunch of stone, and if they've already got a bunch of stone, you might just give up and let them have it really. You can't really stop the player getting it. But, unless you can somehow find an influx of stone that quick, which I don't think is remotely possible. But on top of that, building them early is very difficult, and that bonus they give you of an extra influence or count as an extra worker at the location is really mainly good if you get it early in the game. So it's hard to build them early in the game, but you want to build them early in the game. The timing's a little bit off. Maybe as a different benefit would have been cool, but I like the fact that the cost gets discounted when you do the contributions, and I don't think they're a bad addition. I just think I'm a little bit ho-hum on them. I'm like, if I could take them out of the game, I possibly would, but they're integral to what you do with the princess, so nothing in this game is particularly modular. You're going to have to use it all, and as I say, I don't think they're bad, I just don't think they're brilliant. I don't think they're wonderful, shall we say, with these. I use them, you have no choice, but like I say, I just feel like maybe a slight tweak or two would have been cool. That's all cool from a multiplayer perspective, so I think Artisans is a better expansion overall from that part. I think it adds stuff that's not particularly complex, but it also is a really easy addition. I think it really did balance out a couple of aspects. This one adds a really cool new addition, and I love the Profiteer and the Princess thing. I think these two are the highlight. The influence track is fine, and the Works of Wonder are fine. But if it does balance out anything from the old game, it does mean that black market resets trigger more often, which is cool, because I think they didn't trigger often enough in the base game, or even with the expansion. Now you've got the black market itself, you've got the guild hall, and you've got these contributions that could trigger a black market reset. That's pretty cool. It makes those powers that trigger from a reset much more desirable on apprentices. So, like I say, it's all good. Really good. Here's the highlight though. Oh, the highlight. You now have a completely revised solo mode. In fact, oh yeah, there's your Works of Wonder buildings. But you now have a new solo mode. Yep, you can pretty much discard everything from the previous solo mode. It's no longer valid. None of those components will work anymore, because you now have a solo mode that is based off the one you get in Viscounts. And oh my word, is it great. Would I play this solo over Viscount solo? It's very hard to tell, actually. Both of them are really, really good. It uses the same premise. You have one of 6 different personalities. It's a double-sided AI board, and it does look like a smorgasbord of iconography. Not gonna lie, it looks pretty daunting, but a lot of this iconography you've seen before. Most of it is the same repeated on all the boards. It's mainly just showing you, oh, if they get this symbol, it means get this, or the guardhouse action priority is the same on all of them. It's just reminding you what it is, and the bit at the bottom is just the priority for capturing workers and putting the wonders out. And that middle track there is just basically they don't get resources. They effectively, when they gain silver, they move a track, and every time it loops around, they get marble, which is worth points. So it's a fairly simple AI to work with their board. The character that they have and the focus, though, is what really distinguishes them, because the character gives them a special ability, and the focus kind of means what they tend to want to do in the game. Like if you play the illusionist, your focus is the black market. You don't lose virtue there, and you go there a few more times than you normally would. The enforcer is about putting people in prison, so it's going to capture your workers more often. The peddler can get pretty good amounts of silver and influence. The patron is all about getting the influence and the virtue. So there's quite a few distinctions between them. There's not necessarily an easy, medium, and hard, and I have certainly not played this game enough to distinguish whether there is an easy, medium, or hard. I think they're just relatively well balanced. I haven't played every single one of these AIs, and I would need to play every single one at least a good 3 times to dictate which one I think is hard and which one's easier. Honestly, I don't think you'll really notice that much. You've got 6 different ways to play the solo mode. What are you complaining about?
Stop whining.
Man, the solo mode is so much better now. It uses the scheme card mechanic. So you have a bunch of future schemes that you put aside. You shuffle the starter ones with a brown header on that. And essentially, you turn over the top card and you do their turn. And yes, there is a fair amount of iconography you have to get used to. There's a few pages of rules. This is not going to be an instant pick up and play. But I decided to go into it with nothing else but the rule book to go by. And it works. You get to a point where... But you need a game to practice, I think. 1 game to practice. It's going to take you a little while to get through it. But by the end of that first game, if you are someone like me who's played this game quite a bit, the iconography will make sense. And you will start doing the AI turns almost probably quicker than you do your own turns. Even though there's a ton of different options they have. And of course, they can get more scheme cards that they shuffle into their deck. And so when you go through, they start bringing more powerful cards. Now, I have beaten it more times than I've lost, but it's not like it's a cakewalk. You still need to know what you're doing. You cannot autopilot this. You need to think, well, hang on a minute, they're likely to go over to there. If they go there, they're going to reset the market. I've got people in prison. Should I get them out, or should I gamble on this? And of course, you can see, particularly with capturing workers, the first game I played against the illusionist, it was a good thing that I was going down a capture strategy, because they were getting quite a few workers on certain spaces where if their card came up, it was just getting them a sick amount of virtue and silver and marble that I had to go and capture them. You need to pay attention to their workers. But they're going to capture yours occasionally. They're going to flip a card and it's going to say, if there's 3 or 4 of your workers on a single spot, they try to capture them. So they're going to dump them in prison. It does a fantastic job of simulating a multiplayer experience. I mean, wow! And it's a testament to how, for a solo mode does not need to be a massively complicated AI that is hard to pilot, that requires you to spend more time piloting the AI than you do doing your own turns. This is proof that you can create a multiplayer AI opponent to a degree. Obviously, you can't fully simulate a multiplayer opponent. They're unpredictable. But you can do a damn good job without making it stupidly complicated. Take note.
Everybody got that?
And on top of that, you've got more characters. So again, I love the variety. The new characters are really cool. So Arnulf, he counts as an extra worker when you go to the princess location. Green can pay silver to negate, influence loss, and can always go to the cathedral no matter what. Blue, the blue character, every time you get an apprentice, get a marble. Charles, you get a silver every time you go to the Profiteer's location. Zaziro, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but can always go to the black market no matter his virtue, and every time you build anything, you get an influence. And Clotilde, I'm not entirely certain how you pronounce that name. I've never even heard that name before, but every time you lose virtue, you get a brick. Interesting, particularly when you start on 13. You can have a massive brick generation engine at the start of the game if you're willing to lose all the virtue. The new characters are great, and now you've got 3 of every colour. So much variety now, especially with all these new apprentices and that. So yeah, the Works of Wonder is another fabulous expansion. Not perfect. Like I say, the wonders themselves are probably my weakest aspect of it, but you can teach this with anybody who's played the game before and it won't be hard for them to learn. Can you teach it with everything to a brand new player? Yes, but not as easily as if you tried it with just artisans. You could maybe consider removing the influence bit, although if you've got the playmat, that's going to be somewhat difficult. You're going to have to ignore an entire right-hand side of the chart. But honestly, I think when I play this game, I'm going to teach it with everything. It certainly doesn't put it into heavy game territory when you do teach it with everything. It does what an expansion should do. Doesn't add too much complexity, but adds some cool stuff and more variety. And of course, the solo mode is a separate thing anyway. You know, the Princess and the Profiteer aren't complicated to explain, and the Wonders are probably the slightly weird thing, but as I say, not too bad. I think most people playing this will get it as long as they're not completely new to a mid-weight game. So, yeah, I really like the Works of Wonder. It's what to rate this. I don't think I would give this a 10 for the reason that I gave Artisans a 10, but I don't know, could I? And like I say, the Works of Wonder are a slight nitpick, and I'm not including the big box or the playmat in this rating. They are separate items. I mean, the playmat is a 10 out of 10, I think. I think it's brilliant if you can afford it. The big box is probably a 7 out of 10. You know, it's great if you can find a way to make use of that space, but the insert is kind of garbage. But in terms of the expansion, more characters, the works, the influence board, you know, and just the revised solo mode alone is the reason to get there. I mean, if you're not going to, saying that, if you're not going to play the solo, there's a good chunk of this expansion that is going to go to waste. So there is that aspect. But I think I'm still going to give this one a solid 9 out of 10. I think it is. I'm giving out a lot of 9s lately. I haven't given out 9s in so long, and yet lately I've been giving out a lot of them. But, you know, I don't want to get too predictable. But, yeah, this is just a really cool expansion. You know, if you are a solo gamer, you need to pick this up. It is essential because the solo mode is so much better. But if you're not in fact, yeah, maybe 2 ratings for this one. It's an 8 out of 10, maybe a 7 if you're only picking this up for multiplayer purposes, because you're only really getting this aspect. And maybe that's not necessarily like an essential purchase for you. But if you are like me, who wants to play this game solo as well as multiplayer, it elevates it to a 9 out of 10 because the solo mode is just that good. So, yeah, the Works of Wonder. I hope this is the final expansion they do. If you're going to give me any more content for this game, just give me more apprentices, more buildings, or another character for each visit, or maybe like another AI board. Don't give me any more mechanics. You have now reached the breaking point for bloatness here. Any more mechanics, and I think you will go just a step too far. So take my word on that. But that's it for me on this Beyond the Base Game video. If you like what you see, consider thumbing up the video, subscribing to the channel, check out the Patreon, and of course, comment on the video. What are your thoughts on Architects? What do you think of this in the West Kingdom trilogy? Personally, I think that Architects is now the best in the trilogy. I think this expansion overall does take it above Viscounts, but both of them are 10 out of 10 games for me. You know, this, will this now elevate it to my #1 worker placement game? Hard to say. I mean, it was already high up in that top 10 I did recently, but this expansion with everything combined, with that solo mode, it could prop it up to space, maybe even up to #1, I don't know. But I think Architects is slightly better than Viscounts, and Viscounts is a decent amount better than Paladins. Paladins is my weak link of the trilogy, and I know a lot of people will disagree with that, but that's just the way I've gone with it. And I'm obviously looking forward to Wayfarers of the South Tigris and that whole trilogy. Can I get free for free this time? We shall see. But until next time, you can check out more content on the channel, including my reviews for First Contact and Alice's Garden, 2 interesting little hidden gem games that you might want to check out, especially if you want something for party gamers or even just a Google Gateway polyomino. Take care, and remember, as always, it's only a game. Bye for now.